Welcome to Life Burst. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Matt, and well, a bit of South Australian radio manufacturing history coming up.
Yes, welcome to Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. My name is Sarah.
Oh, well, and I'm Matt. But in the studio, we have a guest today to share a passion of his, but also a little bit of his life. So welcome, Keith.
Welcome, yes.
Keith, take us back. Life for all of us started somewhere. Where did it start for you?
In the Unley area. I've always lived in Adelaide. Grew up through the schools through around the Unley area and headed off. I worked for John Martin's for a number of years in the 80s before they closed. And then toured with a theatre company nationally in 1985, which is another whole story in itself. And then came back to Adelaide and started in the audio sound production PA area and developed on into working in musical instrument area for a number of years with Allen's Music, and then on into the commercial audio visual industry with two different companies for 20 plus years. And now I'm just starting to wind back after 37 years in that career. But along the process, my father worked in the radio industry in Adelaide in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, so tell us about your family growing up. Who was around you? What's your family made of?
So just one older brother. My mother and father are living in a small house in Unley, and just lots of memories of my father being actively involved in not quite video broadcast like this, but audio recording and PA and all sorts of things. Professionally for a period up to his retirement with the Department of Agriculture, but there was always reel-to-reel recorders and record players and all those sort of things in the house. And as I got into my teenage and into my 20s, I started to realise more about his history from the 40s and 50s, and especially when he retired and started collecting a lot of radio and audio recording equipment, which eventually led to a registered private museum in the family home in Unley, which was static in that location for 20 years. And then he left all that to me when he passed in 2008, which is now a pop-up exhibition I do in libraries, and I think I've done 18 libraries now over the last 5 or 6 years, usually during the History Festival in May. And it's been an interesting side hobby to my career in the audiovisual industry.
Yeah, so was your mum on board with this as well?
I think she just tolerated, and when my brother and I both got married and moved out of the family home, she often told the story of my father saying, "What are we going to do with the front room now?" And my mother saying, "Well, it's not what I'm going to do with it, it's what you're going to do with it, with your collection." And he grew it to around 400 items in that registered private museum while it was static in that location.
Yeah. So was there one thing growing up that you weren't allowed to touch?
Well, interestingly, a lot of the equipment, including the recorder that's in the front shop, the reel-to-reel recorders in the front shop, are driven by valves, and valves required a fairly high voltage.
Yeah.
And our father never actually showed me or my older brother about how to work with valves, presumably because of the high voltages and the potential to, do injury and potentially kill yourself with them. So
Did that stop you though?
It did with valves, yes.
Right.
But I had lots of interests through school and things too, sport and all sorts of other things. So electronics was not really my core area, but being a musician as well, playing drums in bands and things, it was a natural progression to get into sound reproduction, PA work, public address work, and with bands and things. And through into working for Allen's Music with musical instruments for 11 years. And that led me into all sorts of different areas with all sorts of different clients.
And what about your brother? Does he into that as well?
Yeah, so he's worked in that area too. He's now self-funded retiree, and I'm heading towards that retirement path. But yes, he's more in the electronics side and did all sorts of things yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's good. So you, you mentioned too that you had this little path. It's a whole story in itself, going off with a drama troupe, was it? So there's a bit of creativity to you as well, or was it more the audio side of things that drew you?
Well, it was a production in 1985 called Regardless that toured Australia for International Youth Year, and it was put together by Fusion Australia, and they had started the tour. I think they'd actually asked me in late 84 whether I would join, and I'd said no at the time. And then in about March 85, they were coming through Adelaide on the way to Perth, and their drummer was having to leave because his wife was having a baby. So they needed a drummer, and I could also drive their truck and drive their bus and help focus their lighting rig and improve their sound system and do all sorts of other things. So I went off for about a year with that tour through to the end of 85 and then a little bit into 86 as well, and then came back to Adelaide and started in, that career as an income.
Okay, so life on the road. Tell us about that. Tell us some adventures.
It was large theatre production. So in Adelaide, the performance was the season was at the Arts Theatre for a week. Probably 7 or 8 performances. It was a full troupe of 30 odd people, backstage cast, backstage support people, cast. The lead character at that stage was Glenn Nicholas, and he was still doing Humphrey at the time, so he had an understudy, a chap called Peter Gray, who I know from Melbourne, and there was quite a few Adelaide people in that tour. But it was large theatres, 200 to 400 seat type houses, and it was a good experience.
So a lot of stress, a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that?
Just the fact it was a repeat show, so it was the same show every night, so you get into a routine. But it was a team effort too, a full cast and crew and. But also running on the smell of an oily rag financially wise, with Fusion Australia funding it, and we were billeted out and paid an honorarium type thing. It was quite an experience, but that's coming up to 40 years next year. So I've just started to contact some of the original cast and crew to float the idea of a get-together gathering.
Okay,
so that could be interesting.
Won't do the whole show again?
No.
just for old time's sake.
Yep.
Yeah. So back in schooling, but before you got to these paths, did you have some sense, with all your interests, what you might love to be when you grew up?
No. It was really, I think, just in the teenage years, getting involved with some local bands that were playing in pubs and recording and all those sort of things, and Rod Boucher was around in Adelaide at the time and running his home studio just up the road from me in Duthie Street. So some of my earliest bands recorded up there, and that just led to more involvement in live music and recording, and then eventually into it as a career.
So there's quite a bit of recording around the place with you in the background.
There are some, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So you didn't have any idea when you were a child what you wanted to be, even though your father was doing all of this?
No, it wasn't firm in my mind really what he was doing. I knew what job he was doing for the Department of Agriculture with audiovisual, but that was the early days of, VHS had just been released at that point, and he was running a photographic studio as well, and they had the first national VHS editing suite in the Southern Hemisphere.
Ooh.
Yes.
There we go.
great.
Well, we will be back with more Life Bursts with Matt and Sarah straight after this.
Welcome back to Life Bursts with Matt and Sarah, and we are chatting to Keith, who has brought in these amazing props.
What are you doing?
Which
It's not even on.
some microphones, some recording equipment, and all this is a part of that collection, the museum that your father had begun to collect, and that you now carry on. So tell us a bit more of that story.
Yeah, sure. So in my father's retirement in the 80s, he started collecting a variety of different things. Some equipment he was involved in manufacturing in the 1950s, a brand called Ferry Sound Industries. It was developed by a guy called Jack Ferry, who passed away in 1966. But then he sort of went on to collect all sorts of other things, and the front room of the family home was empty and available. So
Because you moved out, right?
yeah, so it progressed to shelving on every wall, with a lot of equipment. And when we finally catalogued the collection and packed it up, there was over 400 items. So there's about 30 items in the Jack Ferry collection, Ferry Sound Industries collection.
Where did he get these from? Like, did he buy them? Was it just given to him? How did
Some
this
of them he actually chased up the people that originally bought the equipment. Or, I mean, there's one recorder I've got that was in the Loxton drive-in theatre for a long time as a background music player.
Oh, wow.
And that closed, I don't know what year, but it closed, and somehow someone knew Nev, and it came back into the collection that way. So, yeah, there's probably, in the original collection of 400, there's probably close to 200 radios, mostly valve radios, some transistor radios, generally 1930s to 80s. But there's also a lot of recorders, audio recorders, so reel-to-reel, like is down the front there.
We do have one, yeah. So for our audio listeners, it's definitely a reel-to-reel. That's exactly what it looks like.
Big, heavy thing that was made in 1952, which was about their second or third version of recorders. I have got one that's 1949, was one of their first.
How long would the tape on those reels work for?
Depends on the speed you run at, and the faster you go, the better the quality. The slower you go is more suited to speech, voice only, not music.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
you
that
can.
doesn't make much sense. What do you mean slower and faster?
Okay, so the actual how fast the reels
The reels turn.
turn and the tape goes past.
So
through
they're
the
quite large,
heads.
these reels. So a fair bit of tape.
Yes,
on
it's a
there?
rectangular box with the tape on top and the controls on the front
Yeah.
and on the top as well.
So just for voice oral history or something, you could get 3 or 4 hours on a tape at a slower speed. But there's all sorts of other recording formats. So before tape, which reel-to-reel tape was followed by cassette, compact cassette, which Sony
Which are a little bit smaller.
made their millions out of.
Yes.
But prior to reel-to-reel tape, there was recording on wire, a really thin wire on spools,
Wow.
Okay.
for a number of years, which continued on into use in black boxes, actually, in planes for a long time. And
how
was
does that work?
So it's still a magnetic impression. So you're taking audio through a microphone and a voltage and recording it onto a medium that has a magnetic substrate, like there's metal in it somewhere. So wire was able to do the same thing. But there's also a whole lot of dictation devices and things, records that were a magnetic substrate with a groove and a record playhead that tracked across the record that was used for dictation and a lot of those sort of things. So there were a whole bunch of formats, some that didn't last very long. And amongst all of those, there's 8-track cartridge players that were in cars for a while.
What's that?
So a square cartridge with a tape inside it that you could put into the dash of your car, and it would play music.
So not like a cassette, but
Similar concept, but it actually had 4 tracks, so you could have a whole album on the tape, and it would play continuously.
and how would that work? I know these things, but I know there's would be people watching
Sure.
that may not know how this works or what you're even talking about.
Yeah. So it's all about a tape of some format, whether it's reel-to-reel or cassette or whatever, passing over a record playhead, and in the record mode you're putting electrical currents in and impregnating things into the tape, and then on the playback you're bringing it back out into a speaker.
There we go. So just be simple, push it into your car
Yeah.
and press play.
So it was a very short season.
Yeah, there were even record players in cars
Oh, wow.
for a short period.
How did that even work?
Very lots of springs and things, but lots of different formats. So within the collection there's at least a couple of hundred audio recording devices, some quite rare, some that only lasted a very short period of time. And most people know compact cassette because it was around for the longest.
Yes,
It's
they're
the
those
most
tiny,
successful.
tiny little record,
Yeah.
tiny little
Yeah.
plastic
Tapes.
rectangular.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. There's Gen Zs out there that don't even know what we're talking about right
No,
now.
they don't even know what a CD
They
is.
don't know what a CD is.
Yeah, you see them
so-
on retro T-shirts.
That's
That's
true.
it.
You do.
Yes.
You do.
And if you wanted to wind them on, you'd put a pencil through
Yes.
Yes. I
and turn the
know about
pencil
that.
And
to
they would
turn the
inevitably
spools.
break inside the car. Anyway, but that's
Yeah.
memory. So you've got, a lot of these things through their eras would have been just thrown away when they broke by people. So you've been able to preserve, with your dad's help, a number of specific items.
So he collected and repaired, and everything in the collection was working in the by the end of the 80s. And it stayed open as a registered private museum through to his passing in 2008, and then he left the whole lot to me. And I kept the whole front room set up the way it was through until 2018. I did have it open during some history festivals, had people come from all over South Australia to see the collection. But when my mother passed in 2018, my brother and I decided to renovate and sell the property, the family home. So I started cataloguing and packing and sorting and all those things. And about the same time, I was given some portable cases that were used for transporting lighting equipment. And I started fitting those out as portable display, transport, storage cases for some of this equipment. So I can now just roll it into a library, stand it up, open the doors, and I've got an exhibition behind Perspex. So I think in the last 6 years, yes, I've curated 18 pop-up exhibitions in local libraries across South Australia, usually for a month or more, usually during the History Festival, which is always May every year. And amongst that is 4 cases of the Jack Ferry story and the equipment, and I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I do oral history talks, typically in the libraries as well.
So why do you like this?
Part of it is continuing my father's passion and vision. Secondly, that it's a good, strong Adelaide, South Australian story. Thirdly, that there's still people around that remember some of that stuff, not for too much longer. But probably the key to it is in the library exhibitions, even though I'm only there for a short period of time setting it up and packing it up, I don't sort of go back every week and stand around to chat to people. Even while I'm setting up and packing up, people come past, typically parents with their kids or grandparents with their children and their grandchildren, and just seeing this equipment tricks off stories and things between generations that wouldn't have been tricked off if they didn't see it. And it can be that's exactly the radio my father had or my grandfather had, and we sat down around, listening to Blue Hills or whatever, through to, I think that's the one, but here's this story that's attached to that memory.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, we've got a few more props here and things that may be stirring those memories for our listeners or our viewers. So we're going to come back and hear more of Keith's story and introduce you to some of these right after this.
Welcome back to Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. And today we're chatting with Keith, and we've been learning a lot about radio history here in South Australia and Australia. And now I'm not being cheesy like Matt and holding one of the microphones from the 1940s or 50s.
But there's some
you
good
can
props.
do that though.
Yeah, we've got some great props here. We'll come back to those.
Yeah.
But Keith, a part of the story and this history, you've mentioned someone called Jack Ferry.
Yeah, so my father worked in a small factory in Mitcham or Clapham on Springbank Road through the 50s, pretty much from 50 through to very early 60s, where they started making valve radios, then moved to wire recorders for a short period, and then reel-to-reel tape recorders, initially just as audio recorders and then with radios built in the front. And in the later part of the 50s, they built school PAs and all sorts of other bits and pieces until basically Japanese manufacturer and depression lifted and things. So Jack Ferry was someone my father met in the 40s, in the late 40s, and started making some things for him, winding some transformers and things like that in our at home.
What's a transformer that's not the movie?
Something that handles voltage, usually steps voltage from 240 volts to a different voltage.
So it
and it has to be hand wound or on a winder, and is basically in every device that we connect to the power will have a transformer in it of some sort. And it has laminations and anyway.
What's lamination?
That's my best. Well,
okay, what else anymore?
That's my best description, so I'll leave it there.
Okay.
But my father started making some of these things and then ended up working for Jack Ferry. Now, Jack Ferry, from this book my father published in 1988, Adelaide's Early Radios and Tape Recorders, there's a whole chapter on Jack Ferry, and he was the son of an Adelaide racing identity by the name of Sid Ferry. He went to Scots College. He went into the AIF as a radar technician during the war. And when peace was declared, he came back to Adelaide, and that's when he started making radios and eventually registered Ferry Sound Industries in the very early 50s and started the factory in his garage, in his backyard at 99 Springbank Road, Clapham. And my father was one of 4 people that worked in that factory, and they produced about 5 machines per week, one a day. My father wrote a whole chapter in this book about Jack Ferry, and he was an entrepreneur, an ideas man. Probably like a lot of people copied some things from English machines, and it was depression period, so everything from overseas was quite expensive. And I suspect they'd pull their money together and buy one thing and get it here and then pull it apart and reverse engineer it and improve it and all those sort of things. But there was a lot of people involved in the army and the radar units and things who had knowledge and expertise that they then wanted to use after the war. Australian manufacture was was very prominent. And in my father's research for the book, he identified that through the 1920s and 30s, there was something like 45 factories in the Adelaide metro area making valve radios. And it was one way to connect with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, newspapers would be days or weeks behind in what was happening in the world. Radio from the other side of the world, caught on long wave, was much more instant. Things like, cricket matches in England could be, the broadcasts could be picked up. And there's a story about in Highmarsh Square, the Healing Radio Factory were there on the side of Highmarsh Square, and they had big antennas on the roof, and they would pick up the cricket from England, and someone would re-announce it through speakers out into Highmarsh Square.
Yeah, okay.
And there's stories about in the evening, people bringing in their little fires and setting up and listening to the cricket out there, and it would be forgotten the word I just used, but re-announced, so to speak.
Re-announced.
And they would use a pencil on the table for the, crack of the bat. And
Bit of drama.
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
all those
the
sort of
radio's
things.
still
So that was so because my father was involved in that manufacture phase, in his retirement, he started recollecting some of those machines and putting them into the collection, which is around 30 items, which is very specific to South Australia, and quite unique in Australia too. There were audio manufacturers in Melbourne, particularly around the Olympics, which I think was 56, and the Queen's visit at the time. There were large outdoor events and things where sound reproduction was starting to be used. And a lot of it was developed in Australia. There's a story in the book about, reel-to-reel tape recorders, record something over a long period of time and then play it back. But there's a story in the book about Jack being asked to make a endless loop tape echo unit, which is just a continuous loop of tape, and a record head and several playback heads to be used at Elder Park, where they were doing large concerts with people right back onto Kingham Road. And the stage, it would have been the sound shell, the advertiser sound shell at the time. And they wanted additional speakers partway back into the audience, and this endless loop tape echo created the delays for that production of sound, so that as the acoustic sound travelled away from the stage, the reinforced sound was in time with it.
Wow, okay.
Genius.
I don't have a picture of that.
Very
I don't
technical.
That's okay.
I don't have a picture of it. I have other endless loop tape echo units. There's one in that I've had in display in one of my pop-up exhibitions. But very ingenious things that were developed.
Well, we've had someone else come in before and sort of explained shortwave and long wave. What is
So my understanding is shortwave is for much closer distances, and long wave is a really long wave which can travel around the curve of the Earth much easier. So, to tune into the BBC or whatever from England, you'd be picking up long wave broadcast. Typically in Australia, it was at night too, when there was cloud cover, and somehow that helped the beams refract around the Earth.
So, for example, a wave from Darwin to Adelaide would be a short wave?
I think they were more medium actually, but
Okay,
I think
right.
shortwave would be maybe within South Australia, and then
Okay.
medium wave across Australia and long wave around the globe. But that's a broad. So the Jack Ferry collection is a very specific collection. The History Trust of South Australia said to me at the time when I was packing up the museum, this is a significant collection for South Australia, but they have a maritime museum, a migration and a motor, not an audio museum. So
Right. Yep. So what you've collected in a way is is significant.
But I found an outlet through libraries,
Yeah,
particularly where they want to activate their spaces. They've got flexible spaces now, and they want to integrate with the community and put on events and things that bring people back into their spaces.
That's
Brilliant.
wonderful. Learning so much today here on Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. We'll be back straight after this. Welcome back to Life Bursts with Matt and Sarah, and today we're chatting with Keith, continuing on our radio history journey. What's next in our journey here today?
We've got a few items here that I can refer to, but first I'll refer back to the Adelaide's early radios and tape recorder.
Your dad's book?
Yeah, your dad's book.
That is out of print in hard copy. It is available on DVD through me, where you can put it in your computer and read the whole book. But there are 2 copies in the State Library that you can read on site. I don't think you can take them off site, but that'd be good if people start picking that up. Another thing I forgot to mention was Jack Ferry actually wrote a manual of tape recording, which I'd heard about, but I'd never actually seen. And when we were packing up the family home, I moved a black cupboard out of my father's shed, which I haven't gone totally through it, but in it I did find a manual of tape recording, a hard copy, which is the only copy I've ever found.
And this is it.
And that's it.
It's right here.
And I have scanned it and archived it. But my father refers to it in his book as being a very easy to read, although it was written from a technical person's perspective, or from a technician. It was written in a very layman's terms, so people could read, what recording was and how it worked. And I haven't even read it myself properly, which is why I can't answer your questions as best as I could. But so there's some of the documents. I'm also involved with the Historical Radio Society of Australia, which has about 8 branches across Australia, one in Adelaide, and they do put out a monthly magazine, which is a fantastic glossy magazine. It has articles about radios and historical things, and
Can I have a look while you're chatting about
yellow
this?
pages and sell
There
and
it is.
swap and all sorts of things. So that's a useful thing. And the Adelaide Club meets once a month, and goes out on some trips and visits to individuals' homes and things. On the table, I've just brought a couple of things.
Tell us
Some
about it.
early microphones and
Yes.
a static microphone from America,
Yes,
I can hold it if you want.
there we go.
which is a crystal microphone.
Yeah.
And that's 1938, I think I looked up.
So this is for those who are listening. It's a rounded with that microphone.
Lots
thatch
of
on the front.
chrome.
Lots of chrome.
Yes, lots of chrome. It is rather heavy.
It's not lightweight, but
Wow.
that's a part of the stand.
Yes, the stand is quite heavy.
Was used in two-way radio and early radio broadcast. There's another heavier, larger microphone I got on the table, an American Amperite, which is a ribbon microphone. The element is a ribbon.
Okay.
That's around the same time, 1938. On the table, I've also got a Morse code key, which
Yeah.
only came into my collection a year or so ago. But the key point, Morse code was used for communication prior to telephone and all sorts of things. But the interesting thing about that is it's branded Clipsal, and
Okay.
people are very familiar with Clipsal being an Adelaide brand, Gerard Industries, and that's 1944, which Morse code was used before that, I reckon, but it was used through the war, but not particularly rare or expensive or anything.
SOS.
But there's not too many floating around
No.
there still.
No, and there's not too many. Unfortunately, there's not too many Morse code operators that were trained during the army that are still around. Although I have met some.
Okay.
There's a ferry turntable arm, which is for a record player.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
record player is a bigger disc.
Yeah, so
It's black.
It's those big CDs, Sarah.
Those
Yeah.
big-
definitely 78 records, big Bakelite type records,
Yeah.
and a motor that was used in the record players.
Right.
Something else I'm actively involved with is an international website called radiomuseum.org.
Okay.
No AU on the end because it's
It's
international.
international.
So that's, I think it was established out of Sweden.
It's on the screen right now for people who are watching on television or
So
online.
radiomuseum.org.
.org. I have all of my 725 items listed on that.
So this is a catalogue of your whole museum.
So my 725, but I think there's, I don't know how many items there are listed on the site, but it's international.
Okay.
There's contributors all over the world to it. It was established out of Sweden, I think. But that's a massive collection of information on anything to do with radio and audio recording equipment, and has been very useful for me to create a website style. You know, you can actually search under what I have in my collection, including a picture and sometimes circuit diagrams and manuals and photos. It's very good for identifying things. I do get a lot of people contact me and say, I've got this radio, I don't know much about it, there's nothing printed on the back, you know, and identifying is half the work. In some cases, some people have got things that don't work either, and there's members in the Historical Radio Society who do repair things and refurbish things. We get things come out of, you know, sheds on farms that have been buried away for a long time. I've got some in the collection. I've got some Traeger transceivers, which were a two-way radio, early telephone type thing that was used to farming properties. And Alf Traeger was another Adelaide person who developed the pedal radio for the Flying Doctor.
Yes.
So I've got some of, not the pedal radios, but some of the later ones that were used in farms. And sometimes with School of the Air they were used.
Yes, I remember going to School of the Air Museum and sitting on one of them and pedaling and talking.
So there's a whole variety of different things in the collection, and I'm involved in quite a few different things. I also get people come to me with often reel-to-reel tapes, or I've even had someone come to me with a spool of wire from a wire recorder and say, this was in my father's collection, I don't know what's on it.
Yeah.
And I have got machines that can be played on, but the State Library has an audio division with a chap, Peter, that works in there that is actively involved in recovering audio and digitally archiving. The Historical Radio Society I mentioned, they have a national website, and the South Australian Club has a website, and one of the tabs on our website is an oral history page, and there's 10 recordings on that page that can be listened to online that were recorded by the Institute of Radio Engineers in the 80s, including a 37-minute interview with my father about the whole Jack Ferry background and things. And that's part of I can't remember the name of it now, but it's part of a collection from the State Library that they manage or own, and we were able to get copies of all 10 recordings and make them available for people to listen to via our website.
So what about you growing up? You shared about people at the library and they bring their grandchildren in and they're saying, oh, I used to sit around and listen in this radio, or used to have this recorder. What about if you were to take your grandchildren into the library and see all of that there? What would you point out and share a story about that you could share now?
So another group my father was in the days of tape recording, there was an organisation called the Australian Tape Recordists Association.
Yeah.
And they used to have monthly meetings, and Jack Ferry and different people were, key speakers, and they'd do Q&A panels and all sorts of things. So I remember as a child going into some of those and seeing typically portable cassette recorders and microphones slung over chairs and all sorts of things happening. And I do have some of those recordings, actually. I do have recordings of Jack Ferry talking about different radios and recorders and in Q&A sessions, and even he was involved with UFOs, and there were groups across the world, meeting and talking about UFOs, and he became a contact person in Australia because of his audio background and the ability to record things and play things back and all those sort of things. And so that was my memories of as a 8, 9, 10-year-old being in meetings. And in my father's book there's some photos of some of those meetings, and there's one photo in the book that I only picked 5 or 6 years ago, that in the front row there's a lady sitting that was my mother.
Aww.
Before I was born.
Before you were born. Okay.
And I've heard an audio recording of my father talking before I was born as well, which is quite surreal.
Wow. That would be really special to have. Thank you for everything you're sharing so far. We're not at the end of the interview. There's still more to go.
Yep.
This is Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. We'll be back straight after this. Welcome back to Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. We're still chatting with Keith, and he's still sharing with us all about radio history, but we're going to move away from that a little bit, and I'm going to ask the question I always ask most people that come in, is how did you meet your now wife, Keith?
My first wife, still my current wife.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Tanya. We were both involved with youth work with adolescents at risk in the 80s, and met that way, and been married 33 years, got a one daughter, 15-year-old daughter, and live locally, and life's good. Tanya's been in a number of roles. She was a funeral director for 16 years, which is an interesting story, and worked with aged care providers, and currently working with the Cancer Council.
Right.
So how did you look across the room at each other? Were you working together? How did this romance start?
Involved with youth at risk, and spent a fair bit of time together, and it developed.
So as you shared a bit at the beginning, but you moved on through a series of different jobs and works, but a lot centered around audiovisual, electronics. Just run us through your last few years. And what
so that's
now.
been the last 37 years has been the focus, but that industry's changed a lot, and I've changed as got older, and my knowledge is, some of it's obsolete now. So last year an opportunity came up to step away from that industry in a sales role, full-time sales role. So this year I'm I've done some volunteer work with the Cancer Council, doing some bus driving for a charter company, and some bus driving for an aged care provider as well.
Oh, there you go.
Which is interesting, taking people out for a scenic tour for an hour or two.
And you get to talk about radios with them.
Where it's the only time they get out of their facility they're living in. So a variety of different people. So diversity of things, and I mean the radio collection and the Historical Radio Societies keeps me busy enough on the committee for the Historical Radio Society Adelaide group, and playing a local band, Sevenfold, which has been on Life Burst before, and we've had 3 or 4 performances this year. Also playing drums and music with another local musician, Richard Palmer, who I've known for a long time. Juggling a number of different bowls and just rolling with what comes at the time.
Why do you like playing drums out of all the instruments?
Well, I never learnt any instrument. There was no piano in the home, so it was the one thing I was easy enough to pick up. And I've always considered myself to be probably a better sound engineer than a drummer, but I can keep time, and that's what Sevenfold predominantly needed and wanted. And when their last drummer was couldn't commit enough time. So, that's led to some very interesting performances over 5 or 6 years now.
And do you still find yourself having to do the technical side of things as well?
I try not to, try and step back from it now and make sure that there's enough people involved, but can step in. I still do some live sound engineering work with a couple of bands. There's a local band called The Fossils, which one of their members is Peter Coombe. I've mixed a couple of shows for them, and I'm now their preferred sound engineer, but they don't perform very regularly.
So it sounds like plenty to keep you busy and
enjoying life.
Engage different aspects of life, and the museum. So you've mentioned that's rolled out into different libraries at the moment. Do you have an opportunity for people to come and visit the collection at other times of the year?
No, so no static museum
Yep.
at the moment. That is something I'm planning to try and continue to chip away at the government. I think South Australia has a rich history of manufacture in a lot of different areas, not just radio, even washing machines and all sorts of things. And there is no museum to celebrate that other than the Sir Thomas Playford. It's a retired Employees Association museum, which is only open once a week. But that's got quite an interesting collection of things that were made in South Australia. So that's something I'll be working on in the next 5 years, probably, is trying to get something established. People attempted to do this in the 80s and 90s, and it didn't happen.
No luck, yeah.
But we'll try again.
In the meantime, they can find you at the website again, which was...
so radiomuseum.org. If you search for Keith Ellison, you'll find my collection that way.
It's up on the screen again for everyone.
The other thing just to keep an eye on is the South Australian History Festival, which is May every year. It runs for the whole month of May. There's a catalogue that goes out into Foodland stores and libraries and council chambers and things. Get onto that, see what's in there. There's usually 300 or 400 events that are fascinating, including whatever I'm doing at the time.
Yes. Now, in the final 2 minutes of our show, Keith, if you had one piece of advice for the people listening and watching today to LifeBurst, what would that be?
I think as your life develops and your working career evolves, it's just be prepared to roll with the changes. I've really only worked with 5 employers, I think, 4 or 5, and some of those have been development from one business taking over another and continuation of employment and things. But especially in the last year or so, is just be prepared to take what comes along next, and be prepared to evolve and change, and consider it as an opportunity rather than a brick wall.
Excellent. Well, Keith, thank you for sharing some of your story and your love for this collection. Some great props here, some stories behind them, and preserving an important part of history. I can see why you want to carry on your father's legacy and passion and vision. So appreciate you coming in today.
Okay, thanks.
This has been LifeBurst. You can check us out wherever you get your podcasts from, community radio, television, and online through social media channels. I'm Sarah.
I'm Matt. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
LifeBursts is hosted by Matthew Karat and Sarah Freeman, with production by Reese Jarrett and Kay Hoshraw Ozadigan. For more episodes of LifeBursts, go to rawcut.com.au. This is a RawCut production.